Hello, and welcome to the show Writing in the Tiny House. The entire point of this podcast is to help the tormented artist by sharing what I know about writing, publishing, and stress management so that you can have the tools to produce the content that you have been eager to write. If you have the steps in place, you can produce a short story in as few as 3 months or a novel in as few as 18 months. And hopefully through the ideas in this podcast, you will have the wisdom to adjust that timeline if you need to. I am Devin Davis, the guy who lives and writes in a tiny house in northern Utah. Thank you for tuning in, and please enjoy today's episode of Writing in the Tiny House.
Hello and welcome to the show. Welcome to Writing in the Tiny House. I am your host, Devin Davis, and here we are, guys. It is another Wednesday in November, and it is still NaNoWriMo out there. I hope that you are getting your daily words in. I have been doing great thus far. So we are taking things in a little bit of a different direction for the remainder of November. A year ago in the fall, I released a mini-series of episodes that were all about villains. And this little series actually did very well as far as the success of this podcast goes. And so because we are all frantically composing in our works in progress, and because I need time to do that too, I am going to re-release those episodes for the 3 remaining episodes in November. So here we are with episode 1 of that mini-series, which is all about villains. And be sure to follow me on NaNoWriMo. My information is in the show notes. Best of luck to you. Even if you're not doing NaNoWriMo this year, good luck with all of your writing endeavors, and enjoy this first episode on villains. So let me tell you my story when it comes to villains. What made the villain such a unique part of my enjoyment of fiction. This actually goes back to high school. Yes, I am going to tell you about the magical time that I was in high school, and the Broadway musical Wicked just came out. And of course, I bought the soundtrack. I knew all the words. I went and saw Wicked here in Utah the instant that it was here playing. And the reason why I bring up Wicked is because of the unique take that story has on who the villain is. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the musical Wicked or unfamiliar with the book that the musical is based on, the book is called The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West. The book was hard for me to read, but the musical was wonderful, and I would take anybody to see the musical, including all of my kids. The reason why this carved a wonderful, beautiful little space in my heart for villains is because the main character, Elphaba, is treated like a villain. She is actually the main character. She's the person that we are cheering for, but she is misunderstood. She is a victim of circumstance, and the entire city notices that she is different, and because she is different and because she is powerful, she is treated poorly. She is treated with violence. She is treated with bias and with fear and with all of the horrible things that you could treat a person. And so towards the end of the story, or at least I guess the second act, she says, "Fine, if this is what you think I am, then this is what I shall be." And I love that. I love a good villain. And my love for villains grew from my experience that I had with this story of Elphaba. And it was from there that I came to really appreciate everything that a good villain brings to the table in a good work of fiction. Now, granted, there are plenty of works of fiction that don't have a villain, just because the story may revolve around some other form of conflict. It could be disease, it could be a competition, it could be other forms of trials in a person's life. Or it could be that unseen villain, like going up against an institution
or something like that. So not every work of fiction has a villain, but when it has a villain, I feel that it gets to be a good villain. And that matters. With more and more people coming out with fiction, with fantasy fiction, with these more epic battles, there gets to be good villains. And the classic space opera, I'm talking to you, Star Wars, the space opera is where there is an obvious good side and an obvious bad side, and the heroes are pure good heroes, and the bad guys are pure bad guys, and there is never confusion about that. With the more recent movies of Star Wars that have come out, they're starting to become more nuanced than that, but with the original many episodes and original many movies, it was that classic space opera of the good guys are the good guys and they're always the good guys, and then the bad guys are the bad guys. And now that so many people are writing these epic genre-specific stories, we are beginning to get more nuanced characters, and especially more nuanced main characters and better villains. It's becoming more common to see a main character that has a dark side, or that sometimes chooses darkness, or chooses a bad thing, or chooses to hurt someone, but they're still the good guy, and they're still the person that you're following in the story and kind of rooting for. At the same time, you get to see them make these dark decisions. Also, it is becoming more common, and I'm so grateful for this because of the color that it adds to the storyline. It is becoming more common to see villains that have redeemable qualities, even though their role in the story is not redeemable. Or a villain in their secret identity, they're a family man, and they're a good dad and a good spouse, but behind the scenes, they're like ruining the world. Or you can see a villain who is doing what they're doing, but they have a completely legitimate reason for it. And that adds such wonderful flavor and wonderful complexity to the storyline itself. When you have this guy who is not so obviously evil, it becomes so fun to kind of feel out, what do I really want to get out of this story? Or where do I find myself in this conflict? Am I really siding with this main character who's kind of a jerk sometimes, and he was written that way on purpose? Or am I siding with this villain who has a completely legitimate reason to do the things that she is doing, and I get it, and under the same circumstances, I would hope that I would be courageous enough to do this too. And so it can be this big moral dilemma that can kind of rip you apart. And I love that. And I love the excitement and the confusion and just the wild ride of being taken on this emotional roller coaster. I love the dichotomy, and I love having to choose or to do some soul searching to see if this was a real circumstance, where would I be? Which team would I be batting for? So for today's book review, I am going to talk about a book that is near and dear to me that was released very recently called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This was released just a few months ago, and it was one of the first books that I read in 2021. And I knew after I finished it that it would be one of the best books that I would be reading in 2021. The writing style of this novel is incredible. V.E. Schwab has definitely built for herself a name in fiction, and she has built it from the ground up. She has done an amazing job. And this book, I'm not going to pretend that this book is perfect or complete in all aspects, because it is not. But there is profound beauty found within this book. And the most beautiful parts, I believe, are the exchanges between the main character, Addie LaRue, and the bad guy, Luke. So I'm not going to give away all of the premise of this book just because it is something that I want you to go out and read. But the entire premise of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is it is a deal with the devil trope. The devil comes in every other chapter and has a thought-provoking and meaningful conversation with Addie LaRue where they discuss life and they discuss morality. And it is the most wonderful, thought-out villain that I have read in such a long time. So add The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue to your to-be-read list today. And I hope that when you read it, or if you've already read it, you can share with me your thoughts of the bad guy, Luke, just because I want to hear what you think. It was one of the most impressive things about the story for me, but I want to know what you think, and I want to know what you thought about him as a villain.
And that is it for today. Go ahead and follow me on social media. On Instagram, I am at Author Devin Davis. On Twitter, I am at Author Devin D. And I also have an account on TikTok. Go ahead and find my information in the show notes of this episode. And remember that my short story Brigitte, which was published last fall, is available on Amazon as an ebook and on Audible as an audiobook. Go ahead and check those things out today. And be sure to join me on next week's episode of Writing in the Tiny House. Run by copy editor Chrissy Barton, Little Syllables Editing is a reliable resource for anyone looking to improve their manuscript. Chrissy does line edits, copy edits, and the final proofread for experienced writers and newbies alike. Go to littlesyllables.com and reach out to Chrissy today. A link is in the show notes.